Matthew John Hoffman was born in 1980 in Mount Vernon, Ohio. By all accounts, he was a quiet but unremarkable man. He worked as a tree trimmer and spent much of his time alone in nature, particularly the woods. But behind his stillness was a strange obsession. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as a reclusive individual with odd habits. Reports indicate that he engaged in unusual activities such as killing and consuming squirrels, trapping small animals, setting small fires in his yard, and spending extended periods sitting in trees. These behaviors suggested a deep-seated fascination with nature, particularly trees and leaves. His past hinted at darkness. In 2001, he was arrested in Colorado for setting fire to a condo complex to cover up a burglary, causing over $2 million in damages. He served 8 years in prison. After serving an 8-year prison sentence in Colorado for arson and theft, Matthew Hoffman returned to his hometown in Ohio with no clear direction. He had no steady job, no close family to support him, and he carried with him the strange habits he had developed behind bars. Gradually, he withdrew from social life and chose to live in isolation. Eventually, he settled in a small house on Sweatland Court, Mount Vernon, a modest rental home that drew no attention. The house was anything but ordinary, sparsely furnished, filled with bags of dried leaves, and a reflection of his reclusive and disturbed personality. Friends and former neighbors later described him as an odd man, reclusive, interested in squirrels, leaves, and spending time alone in trees. Something about him had always been off. On the morning of November 10th, 2010, Matthew Hoffman left his home on Sweatland Court, a quiet residential area in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Before leaving, Hoffman had already planned his actions. He brought with him a set of suspicious items, such as large garbage bags, a tarp, duct tape, gloves, and a knife. Items that revealed the calculated and sinister nature of the crime he was about to commit. Driving his silver Toyota Yaris, Hoffman began making his way out of his quiet neighborhood, heading toward Apple Valley in the small town of Howard, Ohio. The distance from his home to the target house was approximately 15 kilometers, a journey that took around 20 to 25 minutes along quiet rural roads, far from public view. Matthew chose a house he felt was suitable for carrying out his plan, one that happened to be the home of Tina and her 2 children. Now, before we continue, let me explain to you about Tina Herman and her 2 kids. Also about her friend, Stephanie Sprang, who also became one of the victims. Tina Herman was a 32-year-old single mother living in Apple Valley, a peaceful neighborhood in Howard, Ohio. Described by friends and co-workers as a kind, responsible, and devoted mother, Tina worked at the local Walmart and was known for being dependable and warm-hearted. Tina Herman was a devoted single mother with 2 children. They were the center of her world, and she worked hard to raise them with love, care, and stability. Having previously gone through a divorce with her ex-husband, Larry Maynard. Tina and Larry had separated some years prior to the 2010 tragedy. Despite the separation, Tina and Larry remained connected through their 2 children, Sarah and Cody. Tina had primary custody and was actively raising them in her home in Apple Valley, Howard, Ohio. Tina had 2 children who were the heart of her life. Her daughter, Sarah Maynard, was 13 years old, a bright, kind-hearted teenager who loved school and shared a close bond with her mother. She was known for her gentle nature and maturity beyond her years. Her younger child, Cody Maynard, was 11 years old, a cheerful, energetic boy who loved playing games, exploring outside, and making people smile. Stephanie Sprang was a 41-year-old mother of two who lived in the same area as Tina Harriman. She was more than just a neighbor. She was Tina's close friend, and someone Tina could truly rely on. The two women shared a strong bond, built on mutual support, trust, and the challenges of raising children as single mothers. But their quiet, ordinary life was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. When Matthew Hoffman set his plan into motion, everything would change forever. On the day everything changed, Tina and her close friend Stephanie Sprang had made plans to visit and survey a nearby apartment. Tina was considering moving there with her two children, a fresh start, a simpler space, and a new chapter for their little family. It was meant to be a step towards stability and comfort, a chance to build a better life. But tragically, that hopeful plan would never come to pass. While the house stood quiet and empty, Matthew Hoffman saw his chance. With no one inside, he crept through the shadows and slipped into the home, unseen, unnoticed. It was a silent invasion, the beginning of something far darker than anyone could have imagined. When Tina arrived home alone that afternoon, she had no idea that danger was already waiting inside. As she stepped through the door, she was met with a horrifying shock. Matthew Hoffman was there, lurking in the shadows of her own home. Before she could scream or run, he lunged at her with a knife. In a sudden, brutal attack, Hoffman stabbed Tina repeatedly, killing her in cold blood. A short while later, Tina's close friend Stephanie Sprang arrived, calling out from outside the house, reminding Tina of their plan to visit the apartment together. But there was no answer. Concerned, Stephanie stepped inside, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded. The moment she crossed the threshold, Matthew Hoffman ambushed her. Just like Tina, Stephanie became a victim of his twisted violence. Trapped and defenseless, she was attacked and murdered in the same brutal fashion. Finally, Tina's children arrived home, completely unaware of the nightmare that had just occurred. The moment they stepped inside, they were met with a scene of horror. Bloodstains scattered across the floor, and the overwhelming silence that filled the house. As they looked around in confusion and fear, their eyes landed on a man they had never seen before, a stranger standing in their home. In an instant, panic set in. Cody, Tina's 11-year-old son, instinctively turned and ran toward the door in an attempt to escape. But before he could reach it, Matthew Hoffman grabbed him from behind and drove a knife into the back of his head, killing him instantly. Sarah, Tina's 13-year-old daughter, was next. Shocked and terrified, she tried to fight back, struggling, kicking, doing everything she could to get away. In the struggle, one of her fingers was severed. But Matthew Hoffman was too strong. He overpowered her, tied her hands, and covered her eyes with a cloth to prevent her from seeing where she was being taken. After the killings, Matthew Hoffman didn't flee the scene immediately. Instead, he took deliberate steps to cover up his crimes, steps that revealed just how deeply disturbed and methodical he truly was. Once Tina, her son Cody, and her friend Stephanie were dead, Hoffman began cleaning the house, trying to remove any trace of what had happened, but there was too much blood, too much evidence. So he shifted his focus from hiding the crime to hiding the bodies. He returned to the home later that night with a tarp and garbage bags, all of which had been purchased days before, another clue pointing to premeditation. In the bathroom of Tina's house, Hoffman proceeded to dismember the bodies, cutting them into smaller parts so he could transport them more easily. Each body was wrapped carefully in garbage bags and plastic sheeting, then placed inside the trunk of his car. Hoffman then drove the bodies to a remote section of the Kokosing Wildlife Area, a wooded nature preserve not far from his home. Deep within the forest, he found what he believed to be the perfect hiding place, a 60-foot-tall hollow tree. One by one, he lowered the body parts into the hollow center of the tree, hiding them within its dark, rotting trunk. In his mind, this was the final stage of his plan, using nature itself to bury what he had done. After taking the lives of her mother, brother, and a family friend, Matthew Hoffman abducted 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, the only remaining witness. With her hands bound and eyes blindfolded, he carried her from the scene and drove her to his home on Sweatland Court in Mount Vernon. The house was nothing like a normal home. Inside, Sarah was met with a surreal and unsettling environment, rooms filled with piles of dead leaves, garbage bags stacked along the walls, and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow the air. Hoffman had transformed his house into something unnatural and disturbing. He led Sarah into the basement where he had prepared a makeshift bed made entirely of leaves. It was there that he kept her captive for 4 days, hidden from the outside world. The basement was dark, cold, and isolated, designed to keep her out of sight and completely under his control. During her captivity, Hoffman provided her with minimal food and water. He kept her tied up and blindfolded most of the time. He rarely spoke, and when he did, he offered vague reassurances that he would eventually let her go. He rarely spoke, and when he did, he offered vague reassurances that he would eventually let her go. For Sarah, those 4 days were filled with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Despite the trauma, she remained calm and alert, holding on to hope that someone was looking for her, and they were. When Tina Harriman failed to show up for her shift at Walmart, her co-workers immediately grew concerned. It was completely unlike her. Tina was known for being responsible and dependable, never missing work without notice. After multiple unanswered calls and no sign of her at home, her friends and colleagues felt something was terribly wrong. Trusting their instincts, they reported her disappearance to the local police, setting in motion the investigation that would soon uncover one of the most horrifying crimes the town of Mount Vernon had ever seen. After Tina's friends and co-workers reported her missing, local law enforcement quickly launched an investigation. Deputies from the Knox County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to her home in Apple Valley to conduct a welfare check. What they found inside the house immediately raised alarm bells, large amounts of blood on the floors, especially in the bathroom and garage area, and signs that a violent struggle had occurred. But strangely, there were no bodies, no signs of forced entry, and Tina's vehicle was missing. Realizing that this was no ordinary missing persons case, the police began a full-scale investigation. Crime scene units were brought in, and officers began canvassing the neighborhood for witnesses or surveillance footage. Every detail mattered. Soon they found a crucial clue: a Walmart bag left behind at the scene, containing garbage bags and a tarp. When they reviewed security footage from a nearby Walmart, they saw a man, later identified as Matthew Hoffman, purchasing those exact same items just days before. That footage, combined with a vehicle description, would become the first major breakthrough in the case. Detectives traced the bag back to a local Walmart store and pulled surveillance footage. What they found changed everything. On the video, a man was seen purchasing the exact same items: tarp, trash bags, gloves, and other supplies, just days before the incident. Using the timestamp, they matched the man's car in the parking lot, a silver Toyota Yaris. The vehicle's license plate led them straight to Matthew Hoffman, a 30-year-old tree trimmer living on Sweatland Court in Mount Vernon. At first glance, Hoffman seemed like an ordinary man living a quiet life. But when police checked into his background, they discovered a disturbing past. He had previously served prison time for arson and burglary in Colorado. Now, with the evidence stacking up, law enforcement moved quickly. On November 14, 2010, just 4 days after Tina and her family went missing, a SWAT team was assembled and sent to Matthew Hoffman's house. What they found there was chilling. Upon entering the home, officers were immediately struck by the bizarre environment. The living room floor was completely covered in dead leaves. The walls of the bathroom were lined with over 100 garbage bags filled with leaves, and the air inside the home was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. Then they moved to the basement. There, on a makeshift bed made of leaves, they found 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, alive but bound and blindfolded. She had been held captive in silence and isolation for 4 days. Hoffman was arrested on the spot without resistance. During questioning, he gave a full confession, admitting to the murders of Tina, her son Cody, and her friend Stephanie Sprang, and revealing that their dismembered bodies had been hidden inside a large hollow tree in a nearby wildlife preserve. After her rescue, Sarah was rushed to a hospital where she received immediate medical care, not only for her physical condition, but also for the severe emotional and psychological trauma she had experienced. She was given protection, privacy, and time to begin processing everything she had been through. In the days that followed, Sarah was placed in the care of her biological father, Larry Maynard, who had already been grieving the loss of his son, Cody, and former partner, Tina. Despite his own pain, Larry focused on giving Sarah a safe, supportive environment to begin healing. After Matthew Hoffman's arrest and the shocking discovery of the bodies in a hollow tree, Matthew Hoffman was formally charged by the Knox County Prosecutor's Office in late November 2010. The charges were extensive and reflected the full horror of what he had done. Given the brutality and calculated nature of the crimes, the death penalty was strongly considered by prosecutors. However, after discussions with the victims' families, particularly Sarah Maynard's father, Larry Maynard, a different path was chosen. On January 6, 2011, Hoffman appeared in court and pleaded guilty to all 10 felony charges. The courtroom was tense and emotional. Family members of the victims were present, many in tears, as the prosecutor read the details of the case. Hoffman remained largely emotionless and did not make a formal apology during the hearing. Judge Otho Eister of the Knox County Common Pleas Court then delivered the sentence. 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, 1 for each murder victim, plus over 100 additional years for the other crimes, including kidnapping, rape, and abuse of a corpse. This meant that Hoffman would never be eligible for parole, never walk free, and would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a sentence that the court made deliberately inescapable. Matthew Hoffman is currently serving his sentence at Toledo Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Ohio. He is housed under close watch and has no contact with the outside world beyond approved legal and security channels. While no sentence could ever undo the pain caused or bring back the lives lost, the punishment given to Matthew Hoffman ensures that he will never harm another person again. It also offered Sarah and the victims' families a measure of closure, knowing that justice was served, and the man who tore their lives apart would never walk free again.